The hot Missouri sun beat down on the dusty fairgrounds in 1877. A traveling circus had set up its tents, drawing folks from miles around. But not all the sights inside were fun. In a small, cramped cage stood Alara. She was a woman so tall that her head nearly touched the top of the iron bars. People called her the giant freak. Alara's heart ached with every whispered word and pointing finger. Children, wide-eyed and curious, would gather, their parents laughing at her great height. Her dress, made of rough canvas, hung loosely on her frame, but it couldn't hide her shape. Her long, dark hair, usually a source of pride, now felt like a heavy curtain she wished she could disappear behind. She hated the way her large hands, meant for tending gardens or comforting children, now looked clumsy and out of place to these staring strangers. Each day was the same. The circus barker, a man with a booming voice and a fake smile, would yell about her amazing size. He would tell untrue stories about her, making her sound like a wild animal. Alara would shrink as much as she could, trying to make herself smaller, trying to become invisible. Her shoulders hunched, and her gaze was always fixed on the ground, hoping to avoid the cruel eyes of the crowd. Sometimes, she would press her face against the cool, rough wood of the cage floor, wishing for a moment of quiet, a moment where no one saw her. The laughter cut deeper than any whip. It wasn't the joyful laughter of children playing, but the mocking kind that made her feel worthless. She remembered a time when her height had felt like a gift, letting her reach apples from the highest branches or see over crowds at town festivals. Now, it was a curse, a sign that she was different, not good enough. Her once bright eyes were now dull and full of tears she dared not shed. What good would crying do? It would only give them more to stare at. She often thought about the sky she couldn't see clearly from her cage, or the feel of soft grass beneath her bare feet. The circus tent was a prison, and the bars of her cage felt like chains around her soul. She longed for freedom, for a place where her size wouldn't be a show, but just a part of who she was. She yearned for someone, anyone, to see past the giant freak and remember the kind heart she still held, even if it was broken into a million pieces. But deep down, she didn't believe such a person existed. How could they? The world had shown her only cruelty since she'd been locked away. Among the gawking faces, a man stood apart. His name was James. He wore a dusty cowboy hat pulled low, and his weathered hands rested lightly on his belt. Unlike the others, there was no cruel amusement in his eyes as he looked at the woman in the cage. Instead, his gaze held a deep sadness, mixed with something else, recognition. He remembered a day, long ago, when he was just a small boy, maybe 6 years old. He had been playing near the old mill pond, trying to catch frogs. He'd stumbled on a loose rock, falling hard and scraping his knee badly. Tears had welled up in his eyes, and he'd felt terribly alone and afraid. Then, a shadow had fallen over him. He'd looked up to see a very tall girl, much older than him, with long, dark braids. It was Alara. She hadn't laughed. She hadn't pointed. Instead, her big, gentle hands had carefully lifted him, setting him on a smooth, cool stone. Her voice, soft and calm, had asked if he was hurt. She'd found some clean leaves and pressed them to his bleeding knee, humming a quiet tune that had soothed his fear. She'd even found a pretty feather and given it to him, telling him it would make him brave. He had never forgotten her kindness. He had never forgotten how she saw him, a scared little boy, and not just her own great height. Now, seeing her hunched in that cage, her spirit broken, made a knot form in James's stomach. The gentle girl who had mended his scraped knee was now herself wounded, not by a fall, but by the sharp edges of human cruelty. He watched as she tried to make herself small, her eyes fixed on the dirt. He could almost hear the whispers of the crowd, the harsh words that must have been tearing her apart inside. James had traveled far, working on ranches and riding the open plains. He had seen many things, but nothing had stirred his heart quite like this. He knew Alara wasn't a freak. She was a kind soul, a gentle giant, trapped and suffering. The memory of her soft voice and warm touch, even after so many years, was as clear as the Missouri sky. He felt a fierce wave of anger at the circus owner, at the laughing crowd, at the unfairness of it all. He had to do something. He couldn't just stand by and watch the kindest person he had ever known be destroyed. A plan, bold and dangerous, began to form in his mind. He took a deep breath, his decision firm. MES moved with purpose, pushing through the thick crowd. The circus barker was in the middle of his usual loud speech, pointing a cane at Alara. "Step right out, folks. See the eighth wonder of the world," he bellowed. But his words were suddenly cut short. James walked straight to the cage, his boots kicking up dust with each step. The crowd grew quiet, their laughter dying down as they watched him. Alara, still hunched, felt a change in the air. She slowly lifted her head, her tired eyes meeting James's determined gaze. For a moment, she didn't know him, only saw a kind face in the blur of strangers. Without a word, James pulled a strong pair of wire cutters from his belt. The metal glinted in the sunlight. The circus owner, a short, angry man with a handlebar mustache, rushed forward. "Hey, what do you think you're doing, cowboy?" he yelled, his face turning red. James ignored him. With a powerful snip, he cut through the heavy chain that held the cage door shut. The sound echoed through the stunned silence. He then reached inside, taking Alara's shackled wrists. The chains around them were old and rusty, meant to keep her trapped. With two more swift cuts, the chains fell to the floor of the cage with a clatter. Alara stared at her freed hands, then at James, her mind reeling. Freedom? Was this real? James turned to face the bewildered crowd, his voice clear and strong. "This woman," he declared, his arms sweeping towards Alara, "is no freak. She is Alara, and she is my wife." A gasp rippled through the onlookers. The barker sputtered. Your wife? She's part of my show. She belongs to me." James's eyes hardened. "She belongs to no one but herself. And now, she belongs with me." He looked at Alara, offering her his hand. "Come, Alara. It's time to go home." Alara hesitated, her heart pounding. His words, "my wife," echoed in her ears. It was a promise, a claim, so bold and unexpected that it shook her to her core. Could this kind stranger truly want her? After all the years of shame, could someone see her as more than a spectacle? Fear and a tiny spark of hope flickered within her. The crowd was still silent, watching their every move. The circus owner was yelling again, but his words seemed far away. James's hand was warm and steady, a silent invitation to a new life. Alara stood frozen, her freed hands trembling. The words, "my wife," echoed in the ringing silence, then mixed with the furious shouts of the circus owner. She looked at James, then at the open cage door, then back at the crowd. This couldn't be real. It felt like a dream, too good and too sudden to be true. Years of being mocked and stared at had taught her a harsh lesson. Her size made her unwanted, a thing to be gawked at, never loved. No man had ever looked at her with kindness, let alone claimed her as his own. She couldn't remember his face, couldn't place him from her past. He was a stranger, yet he spoke with such certainty. "Come on, Alara," James urged again, his voice gentle but firm. He stepped back slightly, giving her space, but his hand remained outstretched, a silent promise. A wave of fear washed over her. Was this another trick? Another way to make her a bigger spectacle? Perhaps he was part of the circus, a new act to draw even more people. Her mind raced, filled with all the cruel possibilities. Why would a man, a handsome cowboy no less, want a giant freak for a wife? It made no sense. He must want something from her, something bad. She shook her head, her long hair falling across her face like a curtain. "No," she whispered, her voice rough from disuse. I don't know you." Her eyes darted around, looking for an escape, but the crowd was a wall of curious faces. James didn't get angry. He simply held her gaze, his eyes full of understanding. "You helped me once, Alara," he said softly, just loud enough for her to hear over the growing commotion. "When I was a boy, you were kind." The words struck a chord deep inside her. A memory, faint and hazy, of a small boy with a scraped knee, A feather, a quiet song. Could it be? Could this brave man be that little boy, grown up? Even if he was, why would that mean he wanted to marry her now? The thought was too big, too wonderful, and too scary to believe. Her heart, so long closed off, felt a painful flicker of hope, quickly smothered by doubt. She had learned to expect nothing but pain from the world. Trusting this man felt like stepping off a cliff. "I can't," she mumbled, pulling back, her large frame trembling. She wanted to believe him, but the years of humiliation had built a wall around her heart. She couldn't let it crumble so easily. Not yet. Even as Alara pulled back, shaking her head, James knew there was no time for explanations. The circus owner, his face purple with rage, was already shouting orders to his rough-looking men. "Stop them! Don't let her get away!" he shrieked, pointing at Alara and James. James didn't waste another second. He grabbed Alara's hand firmly but gently. "We have to go now," he commanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. The urgency in his tone, the angry shouts from behind, and the sudden push of the crowd as people scattered made Alara move without thinking. Her large, unbound legs, stiff from long confinement, stumbled at first, but James held her steady. They burst out of the tent, the bright sunlight momentarily blinding Alara. The chaos of the fairgrounds was all around them. Music, laughter, the smell of popcorn and sawdust. But for Alara, it was all a blur. Her only focus was James, pulling her through the throng of people. He was surprisingly strong, clearing a path for her with his broad shoulders. "My horse is this way," James yelled over the noise, tugging her towards the edge of the fairground where horses were tied. She could hear the heavy thud of boots behind them, the angry roars of the circus owner and his men getting closer. Fear, sharp and cold, finally broke through her confusion. This was real. She was escaping. They reached a sturdy brown horse, already saddled. James quickly helped Alara onto its back. Her long legs made it a bit awkward, but she managed, her hands clutching the saddle horn tightly. James then swung himself up behind her, taking the reins. "Hold on tight," he shouted, kicking the horse into a gallop. The horse surged forward, leaving the fairgrounds behind in a cloud of dust. Alara risked a quick glance over her shoulder. The circus owner, a furious dot in the distance, was shaking his fist. Behind him, two burly men, likely circus strongmen, were already mounting their own horses, starting the chase. The wind whipped Alara's hair around her face, and the rhythmic pounding of the horses' hooves filled her ears. James's arm was firm around her waist, keeping her steady. She felt a strange mix of terror and a wild, exhilarating thrill. She was free, even if it was a dangerous, uncertain freedom. The thought of being caught, of being dragged back to that cage, spurred her on. She leaned into James, trusting his guidance, for now. Their escape had begun. The horse thundered across the open fields of Missouri, carrying James and Alara away from the circus and its angry owner. The wind whipped past Alara's face, pulling at her hair, and the smell of fresh earth filled her nose. It had been so long since she felt the open air, so long since she had moved so freely. James steered the horse with practiced skill, guiding it over bumps and around bushes, always looking back to make sure they weren't being caught. The pursuit was fierce. The circus men, though not as skilled riders as James, were determined. Alara could hear their shouts growing louder, then fading, then growing louder again as they gained or lost ground. James urged his horse faster, his body tense but calm. "Hold on, Alara," he called out, his voice steady. "We'll lose them in the woods ahead." As they plunged into a thick patch of trees, the chase became more dangerous. Branches slapped at them, and the ground was uneven. James ducked and weaved, protecting Alara as best he could. Once a low branch nearly knocked Alara off, but James quickly pulled her closer, his arm tightening around her waist. He even used his free hand to bat away a thorny vine that reached for her face. He led them through narrow trails, across a shallow creek, and up a steep bank. Alara watched him, amazed. He knew these lands well. He wasn't just running. He was guiding them, using every dip and turn of the land to their advantage. His face was set with focus, his eyes sharp and alert. He was brave, she realized, truly brave, not just in cutting her chains, but in facing this danger head-on. At one point, they heard a gunshot crack through the air. A bullet whizzed past, close enough to make the horse shy. Alara gasped, pressing herself against James's back. But James didn't panic. He just spurred the horse faster, leading them deeper into the woods, toward the hidden path he knew. Hours passed in this wild race. The sun began to dip lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The sounds of their pursuers grew faint, then disappeared altogether. James finally slowed the horse to a trot, then a walk, listening intently. Silence. They had lost them. Alara let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She was tired, sore, and still scared, but also filled with a new feeling, a tiny spark of admiration for the man who had risked everything for her. He hadn't left her side, he hadn't given up, and he had protected her. In the fading light, James looked back at her, a small, tired smile on his face. "We're safe for now, Alara," he said, his voice soft. "We made it." After what felt like an endless ride through the darkening woods, James led them out into a clearing. Ahead, nestled among rolling hills, stood a small, wooden house. A wisp of smoke curled from its chimney, and a faint, warm glow spilled from a single window. It wasn't grand, but it looked peaceful, solid, and utterly welcoming. "This is it," James said, his voice soft with relief. "My ranch." Alara slid off the horse, her legs stiff and sore. She looked at the little house, then at James. He dismounted, leading the horse to a small barn nearby. He didn't ask her to help, just told her to go inside and make herself at home. For so long, her home had been a cage. This felt like a dream. Stepping onto the small porch, Alara hesitated before pushing open the door. Inside, a fire crackled in a stone fireplace, chasing away the evening chill. The room was simple but clean. A worn but comfortable-looking armchair sat by the fire. A wooden table held a half-finished meal, and a kettle sang softly on a small stove. The air smelled of wood smoke and something delicious like stew. It was small, but it felt large with quiet comfort. She walked slowly, touching the rough-hewn table, feeling the warmth from the fire. No bars, no curious eyes, no mocking laughter. Just peace. Her huge frame, which always felt out of place in the circus, seemed to fit here, where everything was built for a sturdy, practical life. James soon came in, carrying a bucket of water. He saw her standing by the fire, her back to him. "You must be hungry," he said, his voice gentle. "I can warm up some stew." He didn't stare. He didn't comment on her size. He simply moved about the small kitchen, getting a bowl and a spoon, his movements easy and calm. He poured her a steaming bowl of thick vegetable stew, its savory smell making her stomach rumble. Then he placed it carefully on the table. "Eat," he encouraged. As she ate, slowly at first, then with more hunger, Alara watched him. He brought her a cup of hot tea, already sweetened. He didn't sit across from her, making her feel watched, but instead tended to the fire, humming a quiet tune. It was the same tune, she suddenly realized, the same soft melody the kind girl with big hands had hummed to a scared little boy with a scraped knee. A warmth spread through Alara, not just from the fire and the food, but from a deeper place. Here, in this quiet house, with this kind man, she felt safe. She saw his caring heart, not just in grand gestures, but in the small, everyday kindnesses he showed her. The wall around her heart, so strong and tall, began to show tiny cracks. The days at James's ranch began to mend Alara's bruised spirit. She woke with the sun, not to the jeers of a crowd, but to the gentle sounds of birds and the smell of coffee. Her large hands, once a source of shame, now found purpose. She learned to help James with the chores, eager to contribute. At first, she was clumsy. She hadn't done much hard work in years. But James was patient. He showed her how to feed the chickens, how to gather eggs, how to milk the cow. Her great height, which had been a burden, now became an advantage. She could reach things on high shelves in the barn that James had to stretch for. She could carry heavy buckets of water with ease. One afternoon, James was struggling to lift a heavy fence post. Alara, watching him, walked over and, without a word, took one end of the post. With a strong, steady lift, she helped him set it firmly in the ground. James looked at her, a wide, genuine smile spreading across his face. "Thank you, Alara," he said, his eyes full of respect. "You're a real help." His words were like warm sunshine on her soul. He never called her names. He never stared at her with pity or disgust. He treated her as an equal, a partner. He listened when she spoke, asked for her opinions, and thanked her for her help. He taught her how to ride a horse properly, not just clinging on for dear life, but guiding it with reins and leg commands. The feeling of the powerful animal moving beneath her, under her control, filled her with a thrilling sense of strength she hadn't known in years. Alara also found joy in the quieter tasks. She learned to bake bread, filling the small house with a comforting smell. She helped tend a small garden, her long fingers surprisingly delicate with the tiny seedlings. She learned to mend torn clothes and blankets, finding satisfaction in making things whole again. Each small act of usefulness chipped away at the shame she had carried for so long. James's steady kindness was like water to a thirsty plant. He saw past her size to the woman inside, the woman she had almost forgotten. He often told her stories of his ranch, of the land, of his dreams for the future, always including her in them. His devotion was clear in every glance, every shared task, every quiet evening by the fire. She was no longer just a freak. She was becoming Alara again, a strong, capable woman, and slowly, surely, a beloved one. As weeks turned into months, the last shadows of Alara's mistrust faded, replaced by a radiant light. James's quiet devotion was not a trick, nor was it pity. It was a deep, honest love that truly saw her for the first time in years. He didn't just tolerate her height. He seemed to admire her strength, her unique way of seeing the world from above. One evening, as they sat by the fire, James was mending a bridle. Alara was patching a shirt, her nimble fingers working the needle despite their size. He looked up, his eyes meeting hers across the warm glow. "You know, Alara," he said, a soft smile playing on his lips, "this ranch has never felt so much like a home until you came." His words, simple and true, filled her heart to overflowing. It wasn't just the kind deeds, the shared laughter, or the way he always made sure she had enough room at the table. It was the way he spoke, the way he looked at her, the complete absence of judgment. She finally understood that his claim at the circus, "my wife," was not just a brave act to save her, but a promise from his heart. She found herself reaching for his hand, her large fingers closing gently around his. He squeezed back, his callous thumbs stroking her skin. In that moment, all the fear, all the shame, all the brokenness of the past melted away. She loved him. She truly, deeply loved this kind, brave man who had pulled her from cage and shown her what it meant to be cherished. With this understanding came a new feeling, pride. No longer did she try to hunch her shoulders or hide her face. She stood tall, her head held high, her gaze steady and confident. Her height, once a mark of ridicule, now felt like a part of her strength, a visible sign of the extraordinary journey she had taken. She was Alara, a woman of great stature and an even greater heart, and she was loved. She began to hum as she worked, the same soft tune she had once hummed to a small boy. The melody filled the ranch house, a song of healing and happiness. James would often stop his work to listen, a peaceful smile on his face. He had given her back her voice, her laughter, and her sense of worth. She felt beautiful, not in the way of a doll or a painted picture, but in the way of a strong, rooted oak tree. She was solid, real, and finally, truly herself. One crisp autumn morning, Alara stood outside the ranch house, watching the sun rise over the Missouri hills. The air was cool and fresh, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. She wore a simple, sturdy dress that James had helped her make, one that fit her perfectly and allowed her to move with ease. Her dark hair was braided neatly, no longer a shield for her face, but a crown. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the sweet, clean air of freedom. Her eyes, once downcast and full of sorrow, now sparkled with life and joy. She saw the world clearly from her unique vantage point, and it was beautiful. The small ranch, with its sturdy fences and well-tended garden, was her home. It was a place where she was safe, respected, and deeply loved. James walked out of the barn, leading his horse, Buck, ready for a day's work. He stopped beside her, placing a gentle hand on her arm. "Morning, Elara," he said, his smile warm and genuine. "Looks like a fine day." She turned to him, her own smile bright. "It is," she agreed, her voice strong and clear. She no longer felt the need to whisper or hide. Her heart was full, overflowing with gratitude and a love that had blossomed from a tiny seed of kindness. She thought of the circus, of the cage, of the cruel stares. It felt like a lifetime ago, a bad dream from which James had woken her. She was no longer the giant freak. That name, that painful memory, held no power over her here. Here, she was Elara, James's wife. She was a woman who could help mend fences, bake bread, and ride a horse with confidence. She was a woman whose strength was not just in her height, but in her spirit, in her capacity to love and be loved. She leaned her head against James's shoulder for a moment, feeling the solid comfort of him. "Thank you, James," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. He wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. "No need for thanks, Elara," he murmured. "It's where you belong." Elara lifted her head, looking out at the vast, open land. She stood tall, her shoulders back, her gaze steady and proud. She was no longer a broken woman hiding her face. She was a beloved wife, strong and confident, finally at peace with who she was. The sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the ranch, shadows that were no longer a place to hide, but a testament to her towering, beautiful presence. This was her life, and she was truly happy.